The fastest way to erase a witness was to let the manifest call him dead first. The last evacuation flight had one rule on that strip of desert concrete. If a body had no flag, nobody argued over it. Cynthia Vance argued anyway. She stood at the edge of the hangar row with the clipboard pinned under one thumb, and the sun hammering flat white light across every stretcher in front of her. 45 degrees Celsius made the tarmac smell like old rubber, hot dust, and burned brake dust. The dead lay in a clean line under sand-colored flags, each shape still enough to look official. The final stretcher had no flag. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than just a maintenance tarp pulled tight over a narrow frame, its canvas filmed with pale grit. The C-130, 300 meters down the taxiway, rolled its engines through another pressure cycle. The rumble crawled through Cynthia's boot soles and up her shins. Sand trembled everywhere. That was normal. What happened on the bare stretcher was not. The dust there jumped in a small, stubborn rhythm, offbeat from the aircraft, like something under the tarp was arguing with the ground. It rose, settled, rose again, a tiny refusal where all the official bodies stayed flat. Cynthia lowered the clipboard without looking at it. The tag had already lied once today. She moved along the row, boots scuffing through powdery sand that stuck to sweat at her ankles. A junior escort started to speak, then saw her hand flatten in the air and shut up. Noise was cheap. Cover was scarce. The heat shimmer beyond the hangar bent the taxiway into a trembling silver sheet, and the C-130 kept chewing air. With that big, steady hunger transports had when they were done waiting for human problems, is less than #0. 4# is greater than. The manifest tag tied to the stretcher frame showed Private Ethan Miller, logistics casualty, moved to dead status, no flag assigned, no priority lift. Neat little lie. Cynthia crouched. Heat came off the concrete through her knee pad and found skin anyway. She peeled the tarp edge back 2 fingers. A face lay under it, gray with dust, lips dry, lashes clotted. Young. Too young, which was not useful information, only another ugly thing the day had brought along. She pressed 2 fingers into the side of his neck and held still. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than. The skin was hot on top and cold underneath. A bad field sign, but not a tombstone. There. Not much. A hard little twitch under the skin, then another. Buried under turbine thunder, buried under the dead status tag. But there, the body opened its eyes. Not wide, not cinematic. Just a slit of terror and fever, enough to turn the whole row of dead men into an accusation. His hand dragged out from under the tarp and clawed at the canvas. Nails packed with sand tore a dry seam open. A bloody medical wristband flashed underneath, stuck to his wrist, its gray plastic smeared dark at the edge. Cynthia caught the wrist before it fell back. The code strip was half scratched, but the time stamp was clear enough to tighten the muscles in her jaw. It did not match the tag. It did not match the manifest. It matched a man who had still been alive after the system had declared him disposable. Private Ethan Miller's mouth worked. Dust stuck to his tongue. They, he rasped. The word barely survived the engine noise. They deleted the manifest. Cynthia's eyes lifted past him, past the tarp, past the clean official row. A dead man did not accuse a system by breathing. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than a living one did. The C-130 roared harder. At the same instant, concrete snapped open beside Cynthia's right heel. No muzzle crack reached her. No long whip of sound from the perimeter. Just a dry impact, vicious and close, kicking white cement dust up her calf and across her face. The escort behind her flinched high. Wrong direction. Cynthia shoved him down by the vest before his spine could turn him into a target. Another fine sprinkle of grit slid off the stretcher frame and onto Ethan's wristband. Now, the rule was honest. is less than #0. 4# is greater than. No flag meant no argument, because the argument had already drawn fire. Cynthia did not waste breath on anger. She signed with 2 fingers, sharp and low, then put her shoulder into the stretcher rail. Drop, seam, now. Her voice came out rough from dust, more scrape than shout. The men on either side finally moved. The stretcher legs bucked. Ethan made a wet sound under the tarp. Cynthia kept one hand on the frame and one eye on the shimmering strip beyond the hangar. Where a shooter had just hidden murder inside an aircraft's lungs is less than #0. 4# is greater than. The drainage seam cut the concrete ahead like a cheap little scar. It was ugly. It was low. It was the only thing on that bright strip of earth that might keep them alive. The seam was not a trench. Calling it one would have been generous, and the desert did not hand out generosity. It was a maintenance cut dropped 1/2 meter into the tarmac, narrow enough to punish shoulders, and deep enough to break a clean line of sight if everyone stopped pretending they had room. Cynthia drove the stretcher nose toward it, as the escort on the far side grabbed steel and pulled. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than. The legs hit the lip, buckled, and screamed metal on concrete. Private Ethan Miller jolted under the tarp. Cynthia felt the shock come through the rail into her palms. She shoved down before the frame could bounce high. A second man slid on one knee beside her, cursed once, then remembered he liked being alive and swallowed the rest. The C-130 thundered again. Sand leapt along the seam edge. Cynthia dropped her own weight after the stretcher, hip first, shoulders scraping the rough wall as she folded into the cut. The world narrowed to concrete, canvas, boots, and heat trapped low like a mean animal. Above them, the flags on the body row barely moved. That bothered her more than wind would have. Sideways, she snapped. Keep him flat. It was a dumb order in a smart shape. Nothing in that seam allowed flat. The channel was barely wide enough for a body turned wrong, and the stretcher had opinions of its own. Its rail caught on every chip and old repair seam. Cynthia stripped the belt from her waist, fed it around the forward frame, then looped the loose end across the rifle sling at her chest. Not elegant. Nothing worth surviving was. Is less than #0. 3# is greater than. She braced one boot against the concrete wall and pulled with her thigh, not her arms, using her weight against the rail. The stretcher dragged 3 inches. Canvas rasped. A rivet scraped a bright line into the drainage wall. Above them, the tarmac still blazed white. Down here, it was worse. The seam held the heat and gave it back through stone. Cement grit stuck to Cynthia's cheek where the first impact had dusted her. It tasted alkaline and dry. Ethan shivered once, hard enough to rattle the stretcher rail against her knee. She felt that tremor and filed it away. Alive, for now. Her shoulder radio woke in a burst of static. The tower voice came through flat, clipped, and clean enough to sound already dead. Evacuation timeline locked. Return to primary access immediately. No panic. No question about the round that had split concrete near her boot. Just the schedule, polished, smooth, and handed down like weather. Silas Cale cut in underneath on the ground band, his voice rougher, closer, pissed off but counting. Vance, birds holding pressure, last slots shrinking. Cynthia did not answer right away. She watched the pattern over the lip of the seam instead. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than heat shimmer, turbine pulse, a faint dust jump on the far curb. The shooter had not missed by much. He had measured. The tower repeated, return to primary access immediately. Primary access was open tarmac and a neat death. The automated sweep would keep caring about the aircraft path and miss the low seam because the system had learned to ignore ground clutter. Cynthia reached up, found the cable at her shoulder, and yanked the connector out. Static died. The silence after it was not silence at all. It was engine roar, stretcher scrape, Ethan dragging air through a throat full of dust, is less than #0. 4# is greater than Cale would hate the dead radio. He would also understand it, assuming he survived being annoyed. A fresh round cut the seam lip above them. The concrete did not explode. It opened, clean and mean, spitting gray crumbs down the back of Cynthia's neck. One escort ducked too hard and slammed his helmet into the opposite wall. Cynthia caught his sleeve before panic made him climb. "Low," she said. "Hands only." She shoved 2 fingers forward, then hooked the belt again and pulled. The stretcher moved another foot, maybe less. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than Ethan's wrist rolled out from under the torn tarp, the bloody band flashing once in the glare. Cynthia tucked it back under canvas with the heel of her hand and kept moving. Every inch down here cost skin. Every inch above would cost blood. The seam ran toward the service hangar like a cracked vein under the airbase, ugly and practical, and too narrow for heroics. Good. Heroics got people tall. Tall got people killed. Cynthia put her boot against the wall, leaned into the belt until it bit her ribs, and dragged the living dead man deeper, is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Into the concrete scar, while the C-130 swallowed another shot, somewhere behind them. Ahead, the seam bent under a grease-stained service door, and the smell changed from hot dust to diesel and old metal rot. The seam carried them down under the service door with all the grace of a coffin shoved through a mail slot. Cynthia went in first, shoulder turned, hip grinding concrete, belt biting across her ribs as the stretcher dragged behind her. The door above them rattled in its frame. Diesel stink leaked through the lower gap, thick enough to taste, is less than #0. 4# is greater than. Somewhere overhead, metal flexed with the sea, 130's next pressure roll. No shot came with it. Then a clean white chip jumped from the seam wall 6 inches ahead of her face. No bang. No whip. Just the impact, small and neat, as if the concrete had decided to spit out a tooth. Cynthia froze with her cheek against warm grit, feeling the little spray settle on her eyelashes and tongue. Dust was honest. The clean hole was the problem. The escort behind her almost bumped the stretcher into her boots. She lifted one hand, 2 fingers flat. Stop. Is less than #0. 3# is greater than Ethan, made a wet little sound under the torn tarp. His wristband had slid loose again, bright with blood in the dim strip of light. So Cynthia tucked it beneath the canvas and held there half a second longer than she needed. Still warm. Still theirs. They moved sideways because forward did not exist down there. Cynthia pressed her left boot against the wall, pulled through her thigh, then let the belt take the ugly part. The stretcher scraped, jammed, hopped an inch, and punished every person attached to it. Its rear rail caught on a repair lip. The escort at the back shoved too high, is less than #0. 4# is greater than. The frame tilted. Ethan slid under the tarp, and Cynthia snapped her fingers once, sharp enough to cut through engine thunder. Level. The man corrected, pale around the mouth, his gloves slipping on slick metal before he found the lower rail. Another pressure surge rolled across the tarmac. This time Cynthia watched the seam lip instead of the stretcher. Heat shimmer trembled above the narrow slice of daylight. The turbine growl climbed, peaked, and buried the world. At the peak, a metal bracket under the service door punched inward with a soft, bright tick, is less than #0. 4# is greater than. A perfect little hole appeared, where no sound had earned it. Not random. Not luck. A rhythm wearing a machine's skin. The shooter was not chasing their bodies. He was chasing vibration, radio, and habits. The dead radio at Cynthia's shoulder popped once through the loose connector, not enough for a call, just a dying cough of carrier wave. Silas Cale got 3 clipped words through before it died again. Pressure bursts, timed. Static chewed the rest. Cynthia understood anyway, and hated that she had been half a second behind him. The C-130 was not just the clock. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than. It was the curtain. Every time the turbine dumped pressure, the perimeter got a free bite. The muzzle report vanished under engine roar, and the impact arrived like weather. She looked at the loose radio cable, then at the escort's handset clipped to his vest, then at the tiny antenna bobbing above the seam like a signal flag for anyone patient enough to read it. Perimeter sweep, short range, enough signal to draw a line. Maybe not exact. Exact was not required when a round could shave concrete until meat appeared. Cynthia reached over, ripped the handset free, and shoved it under the stretcher rail. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than radio's off. The escort stared. She took his knife, cut the cable, and handed the dead unit back. That explained it well enough. The cost arrived immediately. No tower correction, no aircraft timing, no clean call for Cale, if the window collapsed. Cynthia took that absence and made it part of the route. One by one, the little voices died. The seam grew smaller after that, which made no sense and was still true in the animal part of the mind. No tower. No Cale, except the shape of his last warning lodged in Cynthia's head, is less than #0. 4# is greater than. No outside help, no polished command voice telling them to return to open concrete and die on schedule. Just hands, boots, heat, and the crude arithmetic of distance. Cynthia dragged. The belt sawed her ribs. Her shoulder muscle pulled hot, then numb, then hot again in a deeper place. Ethan's fingers twitched under the tarp against the frame, weak little taps that did not match the engine and did not quit. That mattered more than any order above them. She set her boot, pulled, slipped on grit, and pulled again. Ahead, the drainage cut sloped up beneath the grease-stained service door. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than diesel smell thickened. Old oil shone black along the concrete lip. Something heavy shifted inside the maintenance bay, too careful to be machinery and too quiet to be friendly. Cynthia raised her hand again. Everyone stopped. The C-130 roared. Nothing struck the seam. That was worse. The distant shooter had paused because something closer had taken over. The service door gave them 6 miserable inches at first, then grudgingly another foot. When Cynthia drove her boot up under the bottom rail and shoved, is less than #0. 4# is greater than the seam. Spat them into a maintenance pocket under the hangar wall, a place built for runoff, cables, and men with smaller problems. The air changed hard. Diesel, old oil, hot rubber, and metal rot crowded out the desert dust. Above the drainage cut, a maintenance cart sat crooked under hanging insulation blankets, its side panels dented, its cargo bed cluttered. With rusted cans, loose tie-downs, a grease-black tool chest, and a cracked plastic water jug nobody had loved in years. The C-130 sounded farther here, muffled by walls and sheet metal, is less than #0. 4# is greater than. But the vibration still moved through the floor and up through Cynthia's teeth. She did not like the muffling. Sound had been killing them. Now silence wanted a turn. She dragged the stretcher into the pocket and felt the frame catch on a curled strip of threshold steel. Ethan jerked under the tarp. His wristband clicked once against the rail. That tiny sound made her look up, not down. Something in the cart shifted without clatter. A wrench rolled half an inch and stopped against a boot that should not have been there. Cynthia lifted a fist, low and hard. Is less than #0. 4# is greater than. The 2 escorts stopped, with their shoulders hunched and hands still on the stretcher frame. Heat dripped from the hangar roof. Oil made the concrete shine in patches. One hanging blanket breathed inward, though no wind touched it. Cynthia watched the bottom hem, the slow sway, the wrong weight behind it. Not machinery. Machinery made honest noise, even when broken. A gloved hand came through the blanket and caught the cart rail. Then a shoulder followed, wrapped in tan cloth, moving low and patient. Lawson did not speak. The man behind him did not either. Is less than #0. 4 is greater than. Their silence had discipline in it. Lawson's eyes never settled on Cynthia's face. They went to the stretcher, to the bloody wrist under the tarp, to the narrow service lane that would carry them toward the aircraft. That made him dangerous in the correct way. He was not here to win a fight. He was here to erase proof. Cynthia shoved the stretcher sideways with her hip. "Cartwall," she said. "Shield him." The escorts obeyed badly but fast, hauling Ethan behind the cart's dented panel. Metal shrieked against concrete. Is less than #0. 3 is greater than. Lawson crossed the last few feet inside that sound, using it the way the sniper had used Turbine roar. The first impact took Cynthia high in the left shoulder. Not a blade, not a bullet. The hard body of a rifle stock swung short in the cramped bay, ugly as a thrown brick. Pain flashed white behind her eyes and erased the hanger for half a second. Her collarbone answered with a deep internal crackle that made her stomach turn cold and her left hand go stupid for a breath. She stumbled into the cart, palms skidding through grease, boots sliding until her knee hit the floor. The second man drove toward the rear rail, low and fast, using the cart bed as cover. One escort tried to lift his head and almost gave the silent shooter outside an outline. Cynthia barked, "Down." The word tore dust out of her throat. She saw only pieces, cloth over a mouth, elbow rising, Ethan's tarp dragging, the bloody wristband slipping toward open air. Lawson's second man hooked 2 fingers under the blanket, not at Ethan's throat, but at the wrist. Smart. Cynthia did not get up cleanly. Clean was for recruiting posters. She hooked one hand through the cart frame and yanked her body sideways, letting the bad shoulder hang useless. Her right hand found the grease-black tool chest by accident or grace. Its corner was sharp, square, and bolted badly to the cart bed. Cynthia used the chest as a piece of the room, not a weapon with a name. She drove her weight into it, jammed the metal corner across the second man's thigh, and felt his stance fold enough for the nearest escort to slam him into the cart wall. The impact rattled cans loose. One can burst under a boot and smeared darker oil across the floor. Lawson came again. No shout. No curse. Just breath through cloth and pressure. He caught Cynthia by the vest and drove her back against hanging blankets that stank of heat and old fiberglass. Her shoulder lit white again, brighter, meaner. She bit down on the sound before it became useful to anyone else. He was angling her away from the stretcher, pulling the fight into the only clean lane out of the bay. That told her where he meant to go next. Cynthia dropped her weight instead of resisting high. The toolbox edge was still under her fingers. She shoved down on it, twisted her hips through the little space the cart allowed, and made Lawson's balance go wrong. He hit the side panel hard enough to dent it inward. Not down. Not finished. The far escort kicked a rusted oil can under Lawson's feet, buying 1 second with the kind of stupidity that occasionally passed for courage. Cynthia took it. She drove the cart rail into Lawson's hip, then dragged the stretcher nose with her good hand while the rear escort pulled Ethan clear of the exposed lane. The bad shoulder tried to help and failed in a sick white flare. The frame scraped past her boots. Ethan stayed under the tarp, wristband tucked, breathing thin. Lawson recovered fast enough to prove the hit had only offended him. He reached for the rail again, and Cynthia put the rifle stock sideways across his path. Not aiming, not firing, just turning long metal into a door bar. A silent impact punched the outside wall during a turbine peak, showering grit over the bay. Everyone froze low. Lawson did not. He used the flinch to move. Cynthia slammed the loose tool chest lid down across his wrist and heard metal bite glove. He pulled free without a word, but the delay was enough. "Move him," she rasped. The stretcher slid toward the back of the service pocket. Behind the blanket line, another shadow shifted. The fight had not ended. It had opened the next door. The careful feet behind the blankets did not rush. That made them worse. Cynthia had seen panic make men loud, sloppy, briefly useful to a grave. Whoever moved beyond the service bay knew how to wait. She had no room left for him. The cart wall rattled against her hip. Her left shoulder hung hot and wrong, each pulse throwing white sparks down her arm. Ethan lay half under the tarp, half under hanging insulation, his breath gone thin enough that the engine vibration almost counted for him. Cynthia put 2 fingers at his throat. The pulse answered late. Then later still. His skin felt wrong in 2 directions, desert heat, cooked over a cold center. The body could do that when blood left the places that mattered. Cynthia looked up at the hanging blankets, at their silvered undersides, stained with grease and dust, clipped to a rusted rail above the cart. Not medicine. Good. Medicine came with instructions. She needed material, pressure, and no permission. "Blankets?" she said. The escort nearest her stared once toward the bay mouth, where a shadow crossed and vanished behind the cart rack. Cynthia hooked his sleeve with 2 fingers and pointed upward. Now. He climbed the cart with both boots slipping in oil. A sniper round did not hit. No one spoke about that mercy. It meant the angle outside was blocked or the shooter was waiting for a better purchase. Waiting was not mercy. Cynthia braced her bad shoulder against the cart panel and reached up with her right hand. The first clip refused to give. She hit it with the rifle stock and felt the shock ring through her collarbone so hard the hanger went gray at the edges. The clip snapped. The insulation blanket dropped across her helmet and face, hot fiberglass stink and old dust smothering her for half a breath. She tore it free with her teeth gritted and shoved the silvered fabric across Ethan's chest. It crackled like dry leaves. His fingers twitched, then clawed at nothing, nails packed with sand. They wrapped him like cargo nobody had marked correctly. That thought came and went before it could become anger. Anger used oxygen. Cynthia fed the blanket under the stretcher rail, pulled it across Ethan's legs, tucked the torn tarp inside it, and cinched the whole ugly package with tie-downs from the cart bed. The work was clumsy because her left hand had become a liability with skin. Every pull dragged pain out of her shoulder and through her jaw. She used her knee to pin fabric, her boot to hold the stretcher steady, her right hand to yank the strap until the rail complained. The witness made a sound deep in his throat. Not speech. Not yet. A wet scrape, sand and blood refusing to share space. His wristband slipped into view, smeared dark, its code strip catching one narrow bar of light from the service door. Cynthia covered it with the blanket edge, then uncovered it again. Evidence hidden too well became just another corpse. Evidence exposed too soon got shot. The tag said dead. The wristband said time had been altered. His pulse said the tag did not get the final vote. Ethan's eyes opened for 5 seconds. Cynthia knew because the world narrowed to counting that without numbers, without breath games, without the childish comfort of pretending rhythm could command terror. His gaze caught on her rifle stock, where his own fingers had dragged a line of sandy blood. He grabbed it with more force than he should have had. The nails scraped wood and polymer. His mouth worked under cracked lips. Cynthia bent close enough to smell blood, dust, and the sour heat coming off his skin. "My mother," he whispered first, so faint the words almost embarrassed the room. Then the fear in his eyes sharpened into work. "Manifest hash," he said, each word broken loose like it cost tissue. Error code 9007. His grip tightened, then failed. They swapped the manifest at ground control. The last words almost vanished under a turbine surge, but Cynthia heard enough. Ground control. Not a dead tag mistake. Not a clerical corpse. A living man had been moved from rescue to disposal by someone with access and timing. Ethan's eyes rolled back. His fingers slid from the rifle, leaving grit in the blood. Cynthia held still until the pulse returned under her fingertips, thin and offended but present. "Got it," she said, not to him exactly. To the wristband. To the blanket. To the manifest that had tried to become law. The escort at the bay mouth lifted his hand. 3 fingers. Movement outside. Cynthia listened past him. The C-130's note had changed. Lower for a second, then harder, like brakes releasing and engines taking the weight of a decision. The aircraft was preparing to crawl, and crawling was enough to leave them behind. She cut one more length of strap with the edge of a broken bracket and tied the blanket package tight to the stretcher frame. Her shoulder hated every inch. Beyond the service pocket, sunlight flooded the hangar threshold in a flat white sheet. No shade after that. No seam deep enough. Only glare, open tarmac, and whatever geometry she could steal from heat. Cynthia looked at the empty stretcher jammed beside the cart, its frame bent but rolling. A bad idea sat there waiting. Bad ideas had been unusually productive today. The empty stretcher rolled badly before Cynthia even touched it, which made it useful. Good decoys should look like human failure. One wheel dragged sideways. One rail sat higher than the other. The torn tarp hanging from it flapped in the heat, leaking through the hangar threshold. A cheap flag for a shooter who had already proved he liked small signals. Cynthia crouched beside it and felt her shoulder throb in time with the C-130's heavier growl. The aircraft outside had changed from waiting to moving. Low-speed taxi, Silas Cale would have said if the radios had not been dead by necessity. The sound crawled through the maintenance bay floor and made the oil in shallow puddles tremble. Ethan lay wrapped tight on the reel stretcher, silver insulation dulled under dust, wristband tucked where Cynthia could reach it. His breath barely lifted the blanket. That was the open problem. Everything else was geometry. Heat, glare, engine pulse, shooter angle, distance to the fuel tank shadow. 200 meters of bright concrete stood between them and the next piece of cover. Cynthia shoved the empty stretcher out first. Not hard enough to look thrown. Hard enough to look desperate. It bumped over the threshold, angled left, caught the sun, and flashed through the heat shimmer like a body wrapped in poor decisions. The tarp snapped once. A turbine surge rose over the tarmac. At its crest, the stretcher's front rail punched inward with a clean little jerk. No shot reached her ears. The decoy kept rolling, crooked and perfect, drawing the invisible line left. Cynthia did not watch it die. She turned to the reel frame and looped the belt around the forward rail. Then around her waist, then through the rifle sling across her ribs. The knot sat too close to the broken fire in her shoulder. There was no better place. She pointed to the escorts. Push low, no heads. One man swallowed hard enough that she heard it. The other just nodded. Fear was allowed if it kept its mouth shut. The open tarmac beyond the door pulsed white, a flat sheet with no sympathy and nowhere to hide a mistake. They hit the sun like opening an oven door with their faces. The glare took the world first, stripping shape from distance until the tarmac became white metal and water that was not water. Cynthia leaned sideways, not upright, dragging at a diagonal across the open strip. Her boot skidded on sand baked into the concrete. The belt went tight. The real stretcher followed with a grinding reluctance that climbed through her hips and into the ruined shoulder. Every pull felt like someone filing the collarbone from the inside. She put the pain where she put bad weather. Present, hostile, not in command. The C-130 roared. The decoy rail jumped again far to the left, hit twice during engine peaks, and folded into a bright, useless angle. 4 seconds. Maybe 5. The shooter had paid for the wrong target, and Cynthia spent the change. "Move!" she rasped. Her thigh shook on the next pull. Ethan's wrapped frame dragged over a rough patch and nearly tipped. She slammed her knee into the rail, keeping him flat, seeing white spots burst behind the white glare. Sweat ran into her mouth, carrying concrete dust and the taste of old metal. The fuel tank shadow looked close until it did not. Nothing on a runway was honest under sun glare. Cynthia read the shimmer by absence, the darker wavering seam where the tank's dry wall bent light wrong. She aimed for that, not for what her eyes wanted. Another turbine cycle rose. She dropped her weight before it peaked. The round took a strip from the concrete behind them, clean and mean, powdering the heel print she had just left. Good. Behind meant alive. The escorts pushed from their knees, shoulders low, faces gray under dust. Cynthia pulled until the belt cut her breath into ugly pieces and her vision tunneled around the tank's shadow. The shooter adjusted now, walking impacts back from the ruined decoy toward the heavier shape dragging across the glare. One round clipped the rear corner of the insulation, snapping silver fabric loose without reaching Ethan. Cynthia grabbed the flap and shoved it under the rail with 2 fingers that could barely feel. She wanted 1 meter. Then 1 more. The old private rules surfaced without ceremony, scraped down to a field fact. 1 timeline did not own 1 pulse. 1 more meter, she said, and hated how human it sounded. The stretcher slid into shadow all at once. Temperature did not fall so much as stop attacking from every direction. Cynthia collapsed against the dry fuel tank wall, still hooked to the rail, shoulder leaking into her sleeve. Across the glare, the C-130 rolled forward, slow but committed. Its nose turned toward the taxi line. The ramp distance looked absurd from here, a black mouth, past heat, brake dust, and bad timing. Then, a tow tractor coughed black smoke and lurched out from the service lane. The square front end cut through the shimmer at a sharp angle. Behind the cracked windshield sat Silas Cale, hunched over the wheel, aiming for the aircraft as if the day had finally offended him personally. The tow tractor came out of the service lane coughing black smoke like it had been insulted awake. Cynthia saw the square front end first through the shimmer. Then the big tires chewing across the tarmac at an angle no sane ground crew used near a moving aircraft. Silas Cale sat hunched behind the cracked windshield, one hand high on the wheel, the other braced on the dash. Even from the fuel tank shadow, even with glare boiling between them, Cynthia knew the shape of that decision. Not rescue. Interference. The C-130 rolled on at low-speed taxi, slow enough to look harmless if a person had never watched mass become law. Its nose turned toward the taxi line. The forward gear tracked clean and patient. Cale drove for that tire like he had grown tired of asking physics for favors. Cynthia clawed at the belt around her waist and found it still locked to Ethan's stretcher. Her shoulder had gone past pain into a white private weather system. She leaned into the frame anyway. Move. The escorts got under the rails, knees bent, faces turned away from the white light. Across the open concrete, Cale cut the wheel. The tractor's tires screamed dry rubber into the heat. For 1 ugly second, the runway held too many moving things and no mercy to sort them. The tow tractor hit the C-130's path, not as a crash, but as a hard, mechanical refusal. its steel front corner shoved under the nose gear angle and jammed there, too close, too late, exactly enough. It would have been suicide against speed. Against a C-130 still crawling for its line, it became leverage bought with bad odds and nerve. The aircraft did not politely choose to stop. It was forced to remember there was an object under its wheel. The nose dipped. The tires barked. A brutal rush of air and brake pressure rolled across the tarmac, low and deep, a sound felt more in bone than ear. Cynthia saw the aircraft shudder through its own weight. The engine note bucked once, then flattened into a furious hold. Behind the main wash, the empty maintenance cart from the service lane flipped on one side and skidded 20 feet, scattering cans and black tools. A pressure wave hit the fuel tank wall and slapped dust over Cynthia's face. Ethan's wrapped stretcher shifted, and she caught the rail with her good hand before it rolled out of shadow. The air smelled of hot brakes, rubber, fuel, and metal, asked to do something stupid for a human reason. Cale's windshield burst inward without a gunshot. It flowered all at once, neat holes and white fractures appearing during the next turbine surge, then collapsing into glitter. Cynthia watched his head snap sideways. For a breath, he vanished behind powdered glass and sun flash. Then his hand came up, palm flat against the inside of the cab, red streaking through dust. Alive. Injured. Still part of the problem, which meant still useful. A tinny speaker on the tractor cracked awake, half drowned under engine roar. Vance. Cale's voice was shredded, dry, and very much him. Tail ramp. Now. I locked the nose gear. The last words broke under static and turbine pressure. The C-130's rear cargo ramp began to lower with a heavy hydraulic groan, dropping toward the tarmac like a steel tongue. The opening inside looked dark and close and impossibly far. Cynthia measured it against Ethan's breath, the shooter's rhythm, Cale bleeding in the cab, and the aircraft fighting its own stop. 180 seconds. Maybe less. Nobody would hand her a cleaner number. She cut the belt from her waist and retied it lower on the stretcher, hands clumsy with sweat and grit. The escort nearest her stared at Cale's tractor as another silent impact punched through the cab frame. Cynthia slapped his helmet. Ramp, eyes down. He flinched, then moved. Good enough. The team dragged Ethan out of the fuel tank shadow and into the broken air behind the aircraft. Jet wash hammered sideways now, hot and dirty, not full force, but mean enough to shove breath back into the mouth. The insulation blanket around Ethan snapped and crackled. His wristband stayed tucked, one small hard truth under all that silver fabric. Cynthia pulled until the world narrowed to ramp, rail, boot, rail. Her shoulder leaked warmth down her side. Across the taxiway, Cale leaned against the shattered windshield, still in the tractor, still holding the machine in place by being stubborn inside it. The C-130 held on its brakes, growling like something chained. At the foot of the lowering cargo ramp, black oil gleamed on steel. A shape moved near the far edge of the aircraft shadow, low and patient, coming in with the heat again. The cargo ramp came down hot enough to look alive. Heat rolled off its steel ribs in waves, bending the dark mouth of the aircraft until it seemed to breathe around them. Cynthia got both hands on the stretcher rail and pushed because pulling had finally become a luxury. The belt hung caught at her waist, sticky with sweat and blood, no longer clever, just another dead idea dragged along by habit. Ethan's wrapped body bumped against the first ramp plate. The insulation blanket hissed over oil and grit. One escort took the rear rail. The other braced low on the side, boots sliding before he found traction. Behind them, the tow tractor held the C-130's nose gear in its ugly grip. Silas Cale was still a red smear behind the broken windshield, still upright. Upright had become a military diagnosis. Cynthia drove her thigh into the stretcher frame. The ramp angle stole half the force. Jet wash shoved the rest sideways. The first yard took almost everything she had. The second demanded the part she had been pretending still worked. Her left arm slipped on the rail, fingers opening against orders from her head. And the stretcher sagged sideways until the rear escort drove his shoulder under it. Ethan made one dry sound inside the blanket. The grooves under her boots were slick with old grease, sand, and darker streaks dragged from the hangar. The aircraft kept growling, impatient, as if this were an inconvenience instead of the reason it still had a soul. The shape from the aircraft's shadow reached the ramp before they cleared the lower hinge. Lawson came in low, cloth over his mouth, one sleeve torn from the cart fight, one hand already reaching for the stretcher. He did not look at Cynthia first. Smart. He went for Ethan, for the wristband, for the one piece of evidence that had made all this machinery misbehave. Cynthia slammed her hip into the frame and turned the stretcher just enough to put herself between his hand and the blanket. Pain flashed through her collarbone, so bright it flattened the world into ramp, hand, steel. Lawson hit the rail with his shoulder. The stretcher bucked. Ethan's wrapped legs slid toward the ramp edge, and the escort at the rear dropped to one knee to catch them. Cynthia's boots skated on oil. She went down hard on her bad side, swallowed the sound, and felt something hot open under the sleeve. Lawson climbed over her weight, quiet as a machine, using the ramp angle better than she was. His gloved fingers dug into the insulation, searching through the folds for the wristband beneath. His breath rasped once through cloth. That was all the speech he got. The ramp punished everybody equally, which was the nearest thing to justice on that strip of metal. The lower escort lost a boot edge and slid 3 inches backward, dragging the stretcher with him. The rear wheel hung for one terrible second over open air. Cynthia hooked her good hand around the side rail and drove her knee into the frame to keep Ethan from rolling off the ramp. Lawson used that commitment. He shifted his grip from the blanket to the rail latch, trying to twist the stretcher sideways and turn its own weight into a lever. If he could dump Ethan now, the wristband would not matter. Evidence at the bottom of a moving ramp became wreckage. Cynthia found the rifle by its sling, half trapped under her hip. She could not bring it up cleanly. Clean had left somewhere around the first concrete seam. She shoved the stock across Lawson's forearm instead, not pretty, not centered, just enough bone and hard edge in the right place. He pressed down with his full weight. Her shoulder lit white and then colder than white. The ramp shook under another engine surge. The aircraft lurched against its brakes. Lawson's hand came within inches of Ethan's hidden wrist. Cynthia changed the problem. She rolled her weight downhill, letting the ramp take her, and drove the stock edge into Lawson's arm with everything left in her ribs. Not a lesson. Not a technique. Just pressure, angle, and a bad joint meeting, worse timing. Lawson's breath punched out through the cloth, sharp and animal, but no words came. His grip failed. Cynthia hooked a boot behind his knee and shoved up with her good shoulder against the stretcher rail. The escort pulled Ethan higher. Another silent impact stitched the ramp side with sparks during the turbine peak. The metal burned through Cynthia's sleeve. She did not care. Lawson hit the side rail, bounced, and came back because men built for killing often confused persistence with destiny. Cynthia met him with the butt of the rifle jammed tight against his injured arm, and drove forward, not standing, not graceful, half crawling with her boots slipping in oil. The C-130 surged again. The ramp trembled. Cargo straps swung in the hold, dull hooks knocking against the wall like slow teeth. Behind her, the stretcher wheels crossed the cargo threshold with a heavy clank, and the sound went through Cynthia like permission. Ethan was inside. Not safe? Inside. There was a difference. Lawson reached with his other hand, no longer subtle, aiming past Cynthia's shoulder for the blanket fold where the wristband lay hidden. She stepped into him and let the bad shoulder fail in the direction she needed. Her weight dropped across his centerline. The aircraft's thrust shook the ramp at the same time. The move was ugly and late and enough. She kicked through his hip, not high, not clean. Just brutal enough to take his balance at the exact moment steel, oil, and jet wash stopped forgiving him. He went backward off the ramp lip. His body struck the tarmac below and rolled into the blast wash, silent in all the noise. Cynthia stayed on the ramp on one knee, one hand locked around the stretcher rail, shoulder shaking hard enough to blur the cargo bay lights. The aircraft began to move. Somewhere inside the hold, a terminal panel blinked green through dust and heat. The C-130 climbed before Cynthia was ready, which meant it climbed on schedule after all. The ramp rose behind her with a heavy shudder, sealing off the desert in pieces. First, the tarmac. Then the blast wash. Then the last bright strip where Lawson had vanished into noise and heat. Cold air knifed through new holes in the cargo skin. It came in thin, mean streams that found sweat, blood, and torn fabric. Cynthia stayed on one knee until the floor tilt told her that staying there would become falling. She dragged herself up by the stretcher rail. The aircraft's body rattled around them, punctured and furious, panels flexing with every change in pressure. Somewhere under the roar, Silas Cale's tow tractor fell away from their world. She did not look for it through the ramp seam. Looking back was a luxury with a body count. Private Ethan Miller lay wrapped in silvered insulation, eyes closed, face gray under dust, still making the small, stubborn movement that counted as breathing. Not dead. Not erased. Not safe. The terminal panel blinked green 3 yards away, mounted beside a cargo net frame, waiting with the patience of a machine that had never been shot at. Cale came through the forward cargo gap with glass in his face and blood running into his collar. He moved like a man being assembled badly while walking. One hand pressed a strip of torn cloth to his brow. The other found the cargo cable reel without asking where it was, because he knew aircraft hardware cold. He saw Cynthia's shoulder, saw the stretcher, saw Ethan's wrist under the blanket edge. His mouth tightened. No speech. Speech would have wasted the small budget of strength left in the cabin. Together, awkwardly, they got the cables over the stretcher frame. Cynthia fed a hook through the lower rail with her good hand. Cale took the slack and hauled until the cable sang against metal. Her bad arm tried to follow and failed, hanging hot and useless against her side. The aircraft lurched. A shot or debris or some last insult from the ground struck the outer skin with a hard, muted punch. Everyone flinched low. Ethan's wrapped body shifted half an inch. Cynthia caught the frame and held until her damaged shoulder shook so hard the pain stopped having edges. The cable locked. It was not comfort. It was metal doing one job correctly. The wristband was stuck to Ethan's skin with dried blood and grit. Cynthia peeled it free slowly because ripping it loose would be easier, and easy had been trying to kill him all afternoon. The gray plastic came away with a tacky little sound. Its code strip was scratched, smeared, still readable. Cale wiped the terminal slot with the heel of his bloody hand, then stopped and looked at Cynthia. Her call. That mattered. Not ceremony. Not permission. Just the right kind of silence. Cynthia pushed the wristband into the mechanical reader. For 1 second, nothing happened. The old fear opened under her ribs, colder than the cargo air. Ground control catching up. Manifest deletion outrunning the aircraft. Ethan becoming a body by database, while his pulse dragged behind. Then the panel clicked. Green lines crawled across the small screen. Identity hash. Timestamp conflict. Evacuation status override. Remote observer lock. Cale leaned close, glass glittering in his cheek. Metadata's unmuted, Cynthia, he said, voice raw. Ground can't bury this body twice. Cynthia watched the final line stamp through. Multinational observers received. Log beyond local control. A second page loaded before she could pull the band free. Not a report. Not an explanation. Just a transfer trail. Equipment lots. Black shipment prefixes. Routed through dead status cargo channels and observer blind spots. The terminal tagged them for external audit. That was enough. The machine accepted what the manifest had tried to deny. A living man existed, and somewhere below, a larger system had just felt one of its hidden wires pulled into the light. The aircraft lifted harder, nose high, desert dropping away behind the sealed ramp and the little torn seams of light in the cargo walls. Wind screamed through one ragged hole near the rear frame. It made the cargo straps tremble and turned loose dust into a pale ghost over the deck. Cynthia sank beside the stretcher, back against a rib of the fuselage. One hand still near Ethan's pulse, because trust was for people who had not met paperwork. Cale sat across from her, knees braced, blood dotted across his vest, glass shining in his skin like cheap stars. He gave her one short nod. She gave him nothing softer back, only the same. The terminal kept its green line steady. Below, the airbase shrank into heat shimmer and runway scars, still dangerous, still full of hands that had tried to make a witness disappear. The data was out. Ethan was alive. The aircraft was damaged. Cale was bleeding. Cynthia's shoulder had become an argument she would lose later. Nobody was absolved. Nothing was over. The audit would come from outside the local chain now, harder to bury, not impossible to corrupt. That kept the moment from turning clean. Ethan's fingers moved once under the blanket, a weak scrape against the rail. Cynthia covered his wristband mark with her palm, not gently, just firmly enough to keep the hand still. No flag covered him. No manifest owned him. For now, the dead had lost one body, and they did not